Gotta change that slide.
Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon, folks, and thanks for coming out today to the IHEC webinar for Athletic Performance Impacts of Alcohol and Cannabis, the hook for student athletes. My name is Annabelle Escamilla. If we have not previously met, I am the Assistant Director for the Illinois Higher Education Center. So we are here today with Dr. Susie Bruce, Max Tinkersley, here to talk about the Gordy Center, what they do for student athleticism, what that means for substance use, and how do we navigate that kind of scene. So I will say, just as some housekeeping notes, please keep yourself muted, and if you have questions, put that in the chat, and we can have that conversation when needed. And as for those who need CEUs, I will be sending out a survey after the webinar today. You can fill that out, rate the webinar, give us some feedback, and then I'll get your certificate for your time today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you all to Susie Bruce and Max Tinkersley, who will take over.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks so much. We're really excited. You chose to spend an hour of your day with us talking about alcohol and athletic performance, alcohol and cannabis. So I'm Susie Bruce. I'm director of the Gordy Center at the University of Virginia, and also director of the Apple Training Institutes. That stands for Athletic Prevention Programming and Leadership Education. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But the Gordy Center is a national organization here at UVA. We're named after Gordy Bailey, who died in 2004 as a result of an alcohol overdose related to fraternity hazing at UC Boulder. So we have a national mission to end hazing and substance misuse among high school and college students. And so we have a lot of different tools and resources, but one of our main areas really is around college athletics. So that's what we'll be focusing on today, because really for our student athletes, knowing how those two substances can perhaps derail their athletic performance can really be the piece that moves them into action. So we're going to be using something called Menti. It's Mentimeter, so you can use that QR code if you get your phone handy, or if you've got two screens and you want to open another screen, you can just go to menti.com and enter that code. We'll be using that just to collect some data. If you're not familiar with it, our students love it. We use it a lot in our programs. And anytime we have one of those interactive slides, you'll actually see at the very top, just like this page, that'll have go to Menti, put that code in. It'll let you join at any time. You actually will see all the slides on your second device as well. So we'll give folks a second to click in. The rule we have, this is what we always share with students, is it's truth or nothing. So everybody wants to know what everyone else is thinking. So try not to mess with the data. If you're feeling like it, we just tell students, we're like, just play air clicker if you're like in a big group in front of people. So we're going to go ahead and move on. Just to see kind of who's here. So just, it should be set. You can select all that apply. Just trying to find out, what kind of background people have, if we've got folks on the athletic side. I know a lot of our work is sort of educating health educators or substance abuse prevention folks, like help me figure out like this athletics thing. I know I want to work with our student athletes, but I just really don't know a ton. So, and whoever is not listed, if you'll use the chat to tell us what that is. We were trying to be really comprehensive, but we would love to know who we're not reaching, because that'll help Max and I both kind of tailor some of our comments, because it does look like the majority of folks here are not in that athletics role, although we might have one who's got the tweet hats. Oh, an athletic trainer. Awesome. We love athletic trainers. In fact, you'll hear with our Apple Training Institutes, we actually have CEUs for trainers. So thank you. All right. So I do want to give a little plug, and we'll have this again at the end, about our Apple Training Institute. Through funding with the NCAA, they pay for about 90% of the cost of this conference. And we've got some coming up in like less than 2 months. So both Charlottesville, Virginia, where our home is, and out on the West Coast. So here's the big thing is it's only $400 for a team of 6 people from your campus to come. The NCAA grant provides meals and lodging for up to 6 people. And what you will wind up doing is you learn about this Apple model for substance misuse prevention that's really unique to athletics that we developed at UVA. And then over the course of a weekend, we start at 4 o'clock Friday, we wrap up 11 a.m. Sunday. You're going to be creating a custom action plan based on data from your campus, as well as what you learn over the course of the weekend. So you have to have at least 2 student athletes. I'll tell you 60% of the folks that come are actually student athletes. So it's really high energy. What you're seeing in this presentation is actually a version of what we give at our Friday kickoff keynote to really talk about why are we all there. So you can certainly ask questions about this at the end, reach out to us separately. And we've got that email. Our website is appleathletics.org, but our registration actually closes soon on December 4th. So just to kick off, as we're looking at college athletics, why are we doing this? So we decided we're not going to bury the lead. We're going to share our biggest success story, which was UVA men's lacrosse program. When Coach Tiffany came to our office summer of 2018, I mean, this is a good team. You know, they went 12-6. They were doing well, but they also realized, you know, there were maybe some issues. And Coach Tiffany has given us permission to talk about this publicly. That was, you know, impeding how well they could actually do. So one of the things we did is we were working with the team through a long process, and specifically working with the student athlete mentors on the team and with the captains. We looked at what their record was, and sort of more than just wins and losses, but what were some of those important stats. And we worked with them, and you'll learn through this program why we picked 15% increase. But we said, all right, this is the summer, this is fall, you got a lot of time, your spring sport. Here's what a 15% increase would look like across all of these important metrics. So we said, looking at your alcohol use, among other things, this is potentially where you could be. So there's a lot that I'm not going to talk about, but basically by working with the team, having it be really student driven and having this goal in mind, ta-da, they were national champions the next year. We were thrilled because we were like, oh my gosh, this actually works. Not only that, when we looked at the actual statistics, they had a 35 to 40% increase from the year before. So yeah, they played a few extra games because they made it to championship weekend. But I mean, these are just really staggering numbers when you look at them. So that's really the hook. And when a team really embraces these kinds of concepts, when we can share information in a way that's really students can relate to, the kind of impact this research has. So with that, knowing we have a lot of folks that maybe aren't working directly with athletics, we're going to share some of what we know about student athlete substance use. And this comes, we partner, and our grant comes from the Sports Science Institute. If you're not familiar with them, tons and tons of really helpful resources around mental health, around substance misuse, a number of health and wellness issues. But they do a study every 4 years. It goes out, as you can see, to a majority of member schools. This is the response rate from 2017, which I realize, yes, it's been a while, but COVID put a wrench in survey collection that year. So this is our most recent data. 1 to 3 teams at each school are selected, and the coach is not present when this data is collected. It's the faculty athletics representative, which is a designated role that is at every NCAA member institution. So that's who administered the survey to those teams. And you can see it was a pretty high response rate. And there's actually, you'll see everyone should be getting a PDF following the presentation, and there are hyperlinks. So that I tested should be an active hyperlink. So if you want to see the full study, you can click on that image and you'll get the full data set. So one of the myths that's out there among administrators is that, you know, our student athletes are a high risk group. and that is across all different substances. So we actually looked at the NCAA's data, which is across all 3 divisions, and the National College Health Assessment, which many of you in the prevention field are probably familiar with as college student use. So we looked at how do student athletes compare. So we know that there's some protective things about being a student athlete for a number of different substances. So you can see, and these were just selected of which substances were included in both of those survey instruments. So you can see, you know, for cannabis, and we're using marijuana here because that was the term that was used in both of those surveys at the time. But you can see there's some protective factors here. And this is the percent who never use. And we know that for most of these substances, students aren't using. So here's where really there was no difference between the general population and student athletes. And again, you can see most of these students aren't using at all. Alcohol being, you know, 80% of students are using that, but there's really no difference between athletes and non-athletes. So where are student athletes using more? Fascinatingly, these 3 forms of tobacco. And hookah, I believe in the survey, was more specific around tobacco and nicotine. So, and these were not huge differences, but again, there were differences where these student athletes, these were the only substances in those 2 surveys student athletes use more. So kind of fascinating. So hopefully gets rid of one of the myths around what students are using and not. So here's why we look at student athletes as a targeted population. Because although they're using at the same rates as non-student athletes, students who do drink, student athletes who do drink, one, they're drinking more frequently, they're drinking more. Why? Because they're competitive. Everything is a drinking game. And they have more negative consequences. Specifically, those are 3 that have been cited in the literature. And again, we, you can see on the bottom of all these slides, like you really want to do a deep dive. Those are some of the references which we are continually updating. So moving into a Menti, again, if you're just joining us, you can go to menti.com, put that code in, and it will instantly put you on the slide that we're working on. But I'm just curious, what percent of student athletes do you think drink in healthier ways? And since this is primarily a prevention audience, we'll say basically below the binge drinking rates. So less than 4 drinks per occasion. And again, that's how the NCAA survey at the time was measuring. So far, we've got a couple folks saying a little under half. It's probably normative that they're drinking 4 or more. But we'll give folks a couple more seconds. Click in. All right, we've got some folks saying, oh, even lower. All right, well, y'all are gonna be surprised then. Oh, we had one person there. Because it's 58%, which our student athletes are actually surprised too. And when we do this in person with athletes, we'll have them say, okay, how many drinks did you have? Maybe the last time that you drank. And what we hear, you know, in the room is always, and again, we're like, truth or nothing, really be honest. A majority of students are drinking in these lower risk ways. So again, sort of that social norm piece. And if we look longitudinally at the NCAA's data, we can see, yeah, whoever had 49%, yeah, that was where it was, you know, 14 years ago. But similar to national trends, students are using alcohol in healthier ways. So it actually is normative to drink, if they're drinking, to drink in ways that aren't hurting themselves or others. We also looked at that data by race and ethnicity. Again, with red is the alcohol, green is cannabis. And so we know that the students that are at highest risk for using, and this was use in the past year, any use at all, are students who identify as white or multiracial. And the students who are using the least, the most protective group, is students who identify as Black or African American. So again, when we're looking at prevention populations, one, recognizing that among those students, that's really protective, emphasizing that, recognizing that that's a really healthy behavior, but also looking at the teams, looking at the racial makeup of teams who maybe need some additional intervention. And then we looked at the data on historically Black colleges and universities. So because that wasn't separated out in all of, we didn't have that tracked within the NCAA data, we looked at the separate research on HBCUs. And we found again that there's really protected behaviors here. They're drinking fewer days per month, and students there also, when they drink, are drinking less than half of what students among other kinds of colleges, primarily white institutions, are drinking. So again, like, what are those protected behaviors? How can we emphasize that, recognize these kinds of positive behaviors? So another Menti, what % of student athletes say, I never drink during my competition season? So this is not, I don't drink at all, or I didn't drink in the last year, but I make a choice when I'm in competition to not drink at all. So we've got about a third, we've got maybe a little over half. So it is actually over half. And then when we look at cannabis, it's like 90%. So we know that these are really healthy behaviors. And again, this is a hook for student athletes. They already recognize, because it is normative, admittedly, it's just a little over half, but that percent went up the last time the survey was administered. So, and you can see, I mean, it's about half and half here of I don't use it at all, and those who are choosing to not use because they're in season. So anytime we can kind of grow this, I think is important. And again, I also want to state, we are not an abstinence focus. And we also know that there's a lot of research around performance and recovery. And so for a particular group of students, that may be a good choice for particular times in class. Again, from that same study, we know that student athletes don't let it interfere with their sport. The vast majority, don't show up late. They're not performing poorly. 93% is a great statistic, but we also talk with students that, like, that's 7%. Think about how many people are on your team. What's 7%? How many people is that? That's probably not random. That is, you could probably guess on one hand who those people are. So if we know that, how do we intervene in a caring way? How can we reach out to them? So additional pieces around this would talk about that caring intervention. And we know that among those student athletes who say, I don't drink, these are the top 5 in order. And you can see, number 2, I don't want to hurt my performance. So it is a strong motivator for those students. And that's why we focus on this. So what do you think? You can use the little slider and enter in. Do you think alcohol and other drug use can mean the difference between winning and losing season? So our first one is strongly agree. And I'll tell you, when we do this with students, this is more of what we see. We'll see maybe a couple, we'll wind up with some in the middle. You can sort of see where the votes are. If we were all in person, we would have a team discuss. We would say, okay, let's all sit around, like really talk about why not? Because get them talking about it. And then I'm going to turn it over to Max, who's going to look at the research around alcohol and athletic performance.
Susie, before we move forward, I want to address this question in the chat. Somebody asked, is Adderall and Ritalin measured in the survey?
And I am trying, and I'm trying, I think there were questions about that. We, in this presentation, looked at, we didn't include that in here, but I do believe that they had a separate section that was looking at other narcotics and was like, are people using opioids, maybe that they were prescribed for pain, but using in a way not intended. So I believe that is in the NCAA survey, and there was a link to that. And then someone asked Delta 8, Delta 9 in the survey, and no, because the last survey was 2017. So a new survey was conducted last year, but the data hasn't been released yet. So that'll come out probably early next year.
Sweet. So moving forward into alcohol and athletic performance, we know that one of the biggest hooks we can get to get student athletes invested here is that relationship between alcohol use and performance. And these athletes all know that achieving optimal performance involves practicing really hard, hitting the weight room, being on the top of their game mentally and physically. They're pushing themselves really hard. The catch here and the place to put the pieces together is that many of them underestimate how alcohol use, even in relatively small amounts, can really nullify and wipe out that hard work that they're doing by erasing the effects of their workouts, reducing their endurance, and compromising their mental game. So now we're going to walk through the research on all of that. Once again, you're all going to get a PDF of these slides, and this slide right here is talking about some of the research that you'll be able to access. The NCAA has great resources for you. If you go to the SSI logo on their site, it'll take you to the Sports Science Institute. And these are the British Journal of Sports Medicine. These two special issues that were done in conjunction with the Olympic Committee. We're going to cite a lot of this research and highly encourage you to check it out as you get more invested in this work. So looking at how alcohol inhibits absorption of key nutrients. These are things that are needed for converting food into fuel, healthy red blood and nerve cells, making new oxygen carrying cells, and energy metabolism and endurance. And deficiencies of these things are common in people who excessively drink alcohol, which further compromises the immune system. Alcohol can interfere with adequate nutrient intake and absorption of vitamins and minerals, be destructive towards vitamins in the body, and cause higher nutrient losses through urine. Common nutrient deficiencies because of this are calcium, magnesium, iron, zinc, and B vitamins, all of which these athletes know are really, really important to their performance. Talking about aerobic performance next, alcohol impacts here. You have increased heart rate and decreased metabologic function when you're doing this alcohol intake, and that impacts blood flow to your muscles and organs, decreasing it. It also decreases the energy available for those muscles to perform. Also important to note, 27% of all student athletes report to practices with low blood glucose levels. Not all due to alcohol use, but important to know that that's the baseline, and that the body spends energy metabolizing alcohol, not making more glucose when you have that alcohol in your body, and you need that glucose to be able to compete. And having that alcohol in your system can lead to severe hypoglycemia 6 to 36 hours after heavy drinking. That's a full day and a half later. Looking at dehydration as well, which is something that athletes are very keyed into. Alcohol acts as a peripheral vasodilator, which means it's increasing fluid loss through evaporation, and it interferes with central thermoregulation mechanisms, which can result in a reduction of core body temperature. So that's increasing your chance of heat cramps, exhaustion, and stroke. It's decreasing your temperature tolerance, and it's reversing heat acclimation training. So particularly thinking about our fall and spring athletes who are out practicing in the heat, working up that endurance, even after they've built it up, alcohol can erase some of those gains. So looking at another mentee here now, I want to know, what do you all think? Within 4 hours of drinking, dehydration causes what % loss of body weight? So we're around 1-2%. More of us think 2. Let me give one more second for a couple more responses. All right, so the majority of us are on 2%. It's actually 3. It's higher than everybody thought. For every 2% of dehydration, you lose 10% in performance across all physiological systems. So even if you're losing minimal body fluid, that fatigue is on the way, and it's going to hit you after that drinking. So again, 3% within 4 hours, and dehydration of 1 to 2% in body mass reduces your muscle capacity, and they really need that for all that hard work. Another mentee for you, thinking now about how many 8-ounce cups of water in total may an athlete need in a day if they have 5 standard drinks. So if you're replacing all of that fluid in your body, all that water, how many 8-ounce cups? Seeing 8, seeing 20. A lot of people saying 20. Some more on 8. All right, we've got some variance here. All right, we're perfectly split between 8 and 20 now. It's 12 cups per day that they need, and it's 17 at the top there. So one alcoholic drink means you're going to need at least 1 additional cup of fluid, And 5 alcoholic drinks gets you all the way up to at least 17 cups of fluid. So you all were pretty much right on the money there. So looking at these Gatorade bottles, we think this is a helpful tool outside of talking about 8-ounce cups, because athletes are often carrying these around. So after those 5 alcoholic drinks, they need 4 1/4 of these. Sorry, 3/4, 4 3/4 of these, which is a ton of water. That's a lot to get back in your system during a long day when you're already getting back to workouts in practice and competition. So looking at motor skills as well, alcohol slows reaction time. It impairs precision, equilibrium, hand-eye coordination, accuracy, balance, judgment, information processing, all these things that you really need to be able to
I'm on a
compete.
training. I don't know what we can help him when he hasn't really done anything with us.
Okay, Robert.
It kind of seems like he's throwing everybody under the bus that we haven't helped him.
Thanks, Robert. So your reaction time is slowed here. All those motor skills are impaired for up to 72 hours after drinking. So that means if an athlete is going out on a Saturday night, doing that drinking, then when they show up to practice on Tuesday, all of those motor skills are still going to be impaired. Important for them to know as well, as they're trying to put on muscle and develop their bodies, that drinking results in a 70% decrease in human growth hormone secretion. So really thinking about all that mass they want to add, that growth they want to do within their body over the course of a season, 70% decrease there. And reaction time can be affected up to 12 hours after drinking. So that's, the next morning, the next day. Important to know as well, sleep and learning, both things that are really important for student athletes while they're keeping up in the classroom. They are getting sleep to recover from these hard workouts and competition and keeping up in their classes. So the student athletes average 6 1/4 hours of sleep on a typical in-season weeknight. And we don't usually share this in presentations with students because it normalizes it. That's not enough sleep. So they're already not getting enough. And then alcohol reduces time spent in deep, restful sleep, which is going to impede their memory formation, and it disrupts that muscle repair. So it's mind and body at the same time that's impacting here. And that sufficient sleep, if they're getting that, maximizes training gains by regulating their hormone release and getting them that recovery. Also really important to know, athletes who drink get sick more often. Drinking depresses your immune function. After 4 drinks, the white blood cells in their bodies are down to 1/4 of the defense they would have had without the alcohol. So it's making that immune system weakened. Your body is working harder to fight off that, or process that alcohol. And then these athletes are more likely to get sick, which is obviously going to impact performance, ability to even show up to competition as well. So here's a really interesting study that was done with a group of rugby players. Athletes who drink double their risk of injury. Within this sample, a little under 1/4 of athletes were getting injured over the course of a season. But the injury rate for drinkers, that's non-drinkers, were under 1/4. The injury rate for drinkers is more than half. So that rate more than doubles with alcohol consumption. Also really important for them to know, it slows recovery. So even if they're not, obviously if they're injured, they're really wanting to get healed up, get recovered, invest in their next season. But even outside of that recovery in day-to-day, they're working out hard, their muscles need to repair, and alcohol slows down that process. Drinking after exercise as well, we often think about like the celebration after a big win. That drinking immediately after, it increases the exercise-induced muscle damage, which leads to a decrease in performance. So even moderate drinking after competition can really hinder that important recovery time. So another question for you all. Recovery can be delayed if an athlete drinks less than how many hours after competition? So how long do we think that window is to delay the recovery? All right, we're in a few different spots here. It looks like the majority are thinking 24 hours. We've got another half between 8 and 16. So, maybe that night, maybe into the next afternoon. All right, majority says a full day. And you are almost right. To maximize recovery and enhance performance, you need to avoid alcohol within 16 hours after a competition or competitive practice. And really thinking about that practically, that includes, you know, a celebration after a win, that includes the evening following a competition. You can recover that night and then drink the next night and still get that detriment to your recovery. So it's a big window, and it's bigger than most of our athletes think it is when we're going into these presentations. And I'm going to turn it over to Susie.
Thanks so much, Max, for talking about alcohol and athletic performance. And we usually have a lot of like ahas and people taking screenshots when we're doing this live, because it is really surprising. It's not information that gets out a lot. So I'm going to share a little bit about what we know about cannabis. And again, using marijuana here, these are NCAA slides, so there's a hyperlink here. There is a PowerPoint that you can download. There's a variety of different resources through the Sports Science Institute. And that's partly where some of this information in these slides come from. So again, looking back at that 2017 study, how often does the typical student athlete use cannabis? Again, in that study, it was just as marijuana, and I don't believe they were including edibles, but it was various forms. I think the language was in any form. So, all right, and this is kind of what we see when we ask student athletes, which is interesting. So the number one answer is folks are thinking monthly. Definitely that most are saying student athletes are using it in a typical year. But again, this is 2017. We know a lot of states have changed their laws since then. We've had a lot that has come up, but you know, 6 years ago, when the study was collected, the vast majority of student athletes said they've never used. So my guess when we get the data early next year that the number will go down, but I doubt that it's going to be normative that people are using every month. And why? Because people do know that it hurts their performance on some level, maybe not as much as it does. But this was never used or used more than a year ago. So most, only a quarter of students are even using in a typical year. And we saw that 90% say I don't use during my competition season. So to look at the differences, and someone put in the chat, I wonder how much this differs. That is a question in the new survey. So they are asking student athletes in the state, basically where you're going to school, what's the legal landscape? Is it legal? Is it decriminal? So there's a variety of those. So that'll be part of the research that gets released next year. So great question. So between the three NCAA divisions, you can see Division 1 has the lowest rates of use. Division 3 has higher rates, although it is still not normative. It's 2/3 not using and 1/3 who used in the past year. So what are some of the impacts? We know that cannabis, because we have natural cannabinoid receptors throughout the body, it affects a whole lot of different systems, and not just if people are smoking it. So whether it's edibles, various ways that people can be using it, it does have an effect on a wide variety of systems. We're going to just highlight a few. Again, there's more research through those NCAA resources. So one is, on your heart. So depending on the strength, resting heart rate can go up really significantly. Blood pressure is going to go up. And along with that, the ability to get oxygen to the cells, to the muscles goes down, which is going to impact your stamina and your endurance. As we saw with alcohol, it can impact the ability to regulate body temperature. So there's a lot of cardiovascular effects of cannabis. What do we think about psychomotor skills? Most people are like, yeah, people are losing a lot of those skills when they're using, but how long do we think those might impact somebody? So far people are saying about 72 hours. So we're looking at a couple of days, a day and a half. All right, well, it is 36 hours. So it's about a day and a half. We certainly hope people are not using, our student athletes aren't using, like a day before a competition. But again, a little more, extra piece around this, that it's going to impact balance and posture. So even if somebody uses one day and the next day they're like, I feel fine, Because cannabis is fat soluble, it stays in the body for a much longer time. And there has been other research studies that show even people who are not regular users, when they've tested, before they use, and then a day or two or even 3 days after they use, they think, I'm fine, I'm not having any impact, but they are having slight decreases. And again, when we talk athletes, everything is like inches by seconds by tiny, tiny margins. So all of these things cumulatively can really impact an individual's performance as well as their team. This is one that was requested when we gave this presentation to campus administrators at one school. They're like, tell us more about sleep, because that's what we're hearing a lot about. So we looked up some of the research, and again, this is where it's important to share like the good and the bad. Like, we're just presenting the facts. So yes, over short periods of time, for someone who has a sleep disorder, it can make it easier to go to sleep. So there could be some benefit. However, we also have to balance that out. Their deep sleep is going up, but their REM sleep is down. And we'll hear that from students. Like, what are some of the not so good things about using cannabis? And they're like, I don't dream anymore. We do know that people who are using regularly can build up tolerance, so they need to use more to have the same effect. And when people quit, they will often, they get sleep difficulties, even if they're using pretty low amounts. So that's those withdrawal symptoms. So if I suddenly quit for whatever reason, maybe I'm going into my competition season, if I've been using, wow, now I can't really get to sleep like I was. So then I think, oh, cannabis really helps me sleep. Not recognizing, no, it's actually the withdrawal symptoms. That can begin the very first day and can last up to 6 weeks. Again, fat soluble, stays in the system for longer. So again, I think these are important things to share as well, and also help people know, depending on the legal landscape in your state, they may be more willing to try things. And we know that we are seeing really high rates of THC, and that kind of varies around the country and what the legal landscape is. But when we look at cannabis rates from the 70s, heck, even from the 90s, they've like doubled or quadrupled. So what is the typical THC level is significantly higher than it used to be. And depending on the form, you can get like 70% instead of like, 15 or 17%. That there are student groups, maybe not so much our student athletes, that are trying to get like blackout drunk only with THC. We also know that synthetic cannabinoids really carry a high risk. People who are vaping with cannabinoids, also there's a whole lot of risk around that to lung function. But we know that those high rates of THC can result in some acute anxiety or psychosis, particularly those who may have a genetic predisposition. And those students may not have any awareness of, family history and know what kind of risk they're putting themselves in. So some people use because of anxiety, but it's actually putting them at risk of really exacerbating these problems. So the research is really pretty clear that it's an ergolytic agent. In other words, it is performance impairing. Occasionally we'll hear like, oh no, this is really helping my performance, but none of the research, and this is based on, several meta studies that looked at all the research. And the reasons are, performance is going down, heart rate, blood pressure, just all of these things that are really important to athletic performance. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Max, who's going to wrap it up around tying all these things together in alcohol and team success.
Sweet. So we've covered a lot of information on how both alcohol and marijuana impact athletic performance, and we want to look at how that adds up to bigger picture team performance. So what's the harm in a hangover? This is a big part of the conversation around alcohol. Alcohol can produce a 3% loss of body weight as fluid loss within 4 hours of consumption. So that's going to have a huge impact, particularly if athletes are showing up to practices or competitions hungover. And we know that within that hangover, there's an increased heart rate, decreased left ventricular performance within the heart, increased blood pressure, decreased endurance performance, and dehydration. All things that are going to drag a team's performance down if one or even multiple members of the team are suffering from those things during practice. I want to know what you all think. Getting drunk one time can negate how many days of training effects? Got 1, 5, 10, or 14 days. All right, we're mostly on 5. Got a response or 2 on 14. Let me give it another second. All right, so the majority of us think it's a little less than a week. It's 2 full weeks. It's 14 days. Getting drunk one time can negate 14 whole days of training effects. And the way that works is it's a loss of physiological conditioning, which includes your heart rate, ventilation, and muscle enzymes. And again, back to that slide on dehydration, that's a big factor here, that every 2% of that dehydration is equal to a 10% loss in performance across all physiological systems. So that's what's wiping out those big gains that they're getting when they work really hard in those practices and performances. So for college student athletes, what do we think a hangover can reduce athletic performance by what percentage? Oh, we're really split. All right, we're in a big old 15 to 40% range here. So it's 15 to 20. Those lingering effects of alcohol hangovers reduce athletic performance by up to 11.4% in elite athletes. That study was done with a sample of Olympic athletes. The impacts are higher for these college student athletes, 15 to 20. Again, that's heart rate, lactic acid and muscle performance, and respiratory and ventilation levels. So knowing that 15 to 20% is the impact, particularly when talking with student athletes, their coaches, thinking about performance, what do you actually want at the end of the day? We often hear from coaches that they want them to give 110% every single day, which we know is not actually possible. And 100% is great. And maybe that's what's happening when you get to playoffs and championships and really like emptying out the tank. Talking to these athletes most of the time in the day-to-the-day, you know, in practice, in regular season, 90% is like what they can really give sustainably pushing themselves. And for most folks, that is acceptable. And when we talk about this 15 to 20% as a result of drinking, the question is 80% of your capacity acceptable? What does that look like in performance? What does 80% look like? And what could adding that 15 to 20 do for your team? So once again, as I was just saying, what does that look like for the team? What does that look like for the individual? How could we add that 15 to 20 in back up if we're not having drinking be a part of our season? And we're going to tie back to the beginning with our story about UVA men's lacrosse. Susie talked about how they, had this intervention. They talked about, we want to cut out drinking during our playoff season. We want to increase that performance, increase our success, reach that highest peak of our potential. They won a championship. And then they did it again. They went back to back. We didn't have one in 2020, unfortunately, but this was 2019 to 2021. We see this 15% increase prediction from 2018 to this championship season. They had an actual increase of 20 to 25% in all these important statistical categories. They were winning more games. They were scoring more goals, having more assists, more shots, all of it just cutting out that factor, bump that up, that really significant 15, 20%, and really looking at these team stats and bumping up those numbers and seeing what it could be and what it can be when you make that move is really, really important. And Susie tells a great story about going to the playoffs recently and hearing the game day announcers in the stadium talking about the team has now created a culture of going dry at the very start of their playoff season. The whole team chooses not to drink, not to have alcohol in their systems for all of these reasons. And they've seen the impacts, and now they have this championship culture. And really talking about culture and what adding that 15 to 20% means is a really engaging way to get these conversations going with teams, athletes, and coaches. So speaking of teams, athletes, and coaches, one more plug for Apple. You can still register. We have this content and so much more. It's going to go beyond the scope of this presentation. Every team that comes is going to get to build an action plan where they're going to see the things that really matter to them and their campus in these presentations, take it in, work together, and build a plan that they're going to be supported by our staff on throughout the following year.
And we've actually extended it, we've extended it today. So you have until Monday, December 4th, if you are interested, and you can reach out to us as well. And we added one last slide in here, which we will play because we've got enough time. It's very short, and we still have time for about 10 minutes of Q&A, and we'll come back to this slide if you want to get that QR code. But we actually took a lot of what we've talked about here, and we have a video, and it's available for free. We have a YouTube channel, and this is something that you are free to download, embed this into your programs. So I'm gonna play that, and we shared sound, so hopefully you'll be able to hear it too. So.
Is alcohol use keeping you and your team from reaching your goals? Compared to non-drinkers, student athletes who drink every week have double the rate of injury. Getting drunk once can negate the impact of up to 14 days of training by increasing muscle fatigue and heart rate and decreasing air supply to the lungs. Hangover effects can reduce athletic performance by up to 11% in elite professional athletes and by 15 to 20% among other athletes by decreasing endurance, decreasing heart performance, causing dehydration, and increasing blood pressure. Drinking after athletic activity slows muscle repair by decreasing vitamin and mineral absorption. Alcohol slows motor skills and decreases strength, power, and sprint performance for up to 3 days. 48 hours is not enough time to recover. Alcohol use keeps student athletes from performing at their best.
So hopefully that's another nice free tool that you can use in any of your programs. So I'm going to put it back on this slide, and we are happy to take any questions through the chat, or if you want to unmute. I'm sure there weren't any other questions. So as we're waiting, if people are typing, yeah, we've been doing this Athlete Training Institute for over 30 years. Over 60% of all NCA member institutions have come. So really, it's just the cost. You know, it's $400 for 6 people. That's not per person. And then just getting to one of our locations. And I will say Newport Beach in January is pretty darn nice. Although Charlottesville is not so bad. We tend to not get too bad weather in January, but it's really a lot of fun, a lot of excitement. We do Mentimeter. We have so much interaction because we know that student athletes in particular, nobody likes to sit around for a conference all weekend, but student athletes in particular. So we do a lot to keep them very student focused and really want to hear their voice as part of creating an action plan. The other piece is then we provide support to you, whether you're the team contact or to your school. We do 2 check-ins, partly to get some data to report back to the NCA kind of anonymously of like overall what's going well, what's a challenge, but it's a great way to brainstorm if you're just looking for like, hey, we want to change our policy. What are some other policies you're aware of? And just kind of brainstorm and get support for implementing change on your campus.
Hey, Susie, I was going to say, we've got a comment from Jamie. She's one of our members on the advisory board from Illinois State. So she says, while not drinking in season for athletics has a hook, isn't use out of season more of a concern? If so, sounds like a double prong approach is helpful, one in season and one when off season begins.
Yes, and that's a great point. And yes, we are concerned. And one of the things, again, when we've got a whole weekend to talk, we do talk about the fact that, you know, people can do, you know, all of us can do kind of dumb things. One of our speakers says, you know, people like to climb things when they're intoxicated and then fall, and then, you know, off season, you know, she actually worked in a student health center and talked about a student athlete who fell, broke their leg out of season and wasn't able to recover by the time the season started. So we do talk about that. And again, we really try to balance out. We don't want to be the abstinence. We don't want to sound like we're abstinence only. it's really a balance of trying to use a motivational interviewing approach of helping draw out that internal motivation. Here's the facts, here's what it's doing, while also having that conversation about what's happening out of season. Because, you know, when we have, I'll tell you with the lacrosse team, when we were working with them, they almost by the end were like, well, what days can we drink? And we're like, oh, I can't really give you that. And it was really an iterative approach with the team of, they started off like, okay, it has gotten out of control. We're going to try to cut back. And we met with them like a month later, like, how's cutting back going? And they're like, it's really hard. I'm like, okay, tell me more, you know, and it really was student driven where they were recognizing. And what really turned the team around is we did a lot of these smaller conversations. We did a version of this with the whole team. And then we let the team drive it itself. And what really made the difference was at the end of April, as the regular season was ending, they had one of the hardest partiers on the team who over the course of the year had finally been like, huh. And he went, this is my last shot. It's my 4th year. I don't want to leave anything on the table. And when he said he was ready to go drive for the month of May, and their championship is Memorial Day weekend, the rest of the team followed. So it's definitely, you know, it was a lot of work, but it was coach support. It wasn't, you know, you're not allowed to drink anymore, but it was really moving them along, meeting them where they were moving. So it's a little bit broader than the out of season, but I think that's that initial hook. And then you can begin some of that work as well.
I'm not seeing any other questions or comments in the chat right now. Let's see. All right. And is there any other added notes that, you know, either one of you would like to share, or, and I think you said you're going to send the slides. If not, I already have them from last week, so I can send those out. And if you mind sending me this flyer for the Apple Training Institute, I can send that to the assistant director or, you know, athletic director.
I have a blurb I can send, makes it a really easy email to forward. Yeah. I realize the time is getting tight, but we have to know who is on your team. The absolute drop down deadline is December 11th.
Okay. So
that's why we're trying to get the registration by the 4th. That gives you a week. There are some other pieces, but the big thing is getting that registration. We know you're coming and getting those names. So you have to have at least 4. You can have up to 6, but all of that is covered in that $400 registration. So it's really because the NCAA has supported this for so long and really put the funding in to make this affordable and easy for schools.
All right. Well, I took note of that, so I'll have that going out soon. But I did just want to thank you both again for your time today and sharing that information. I'm excited to be able to share this with other affiliates. And, you know, I'm thinking too, just to bring it up as conversation of our affiliate meetings on how we look at alcohol use and on our athletic teams. There are different population groups on campus too, because not just, you know, athletes, it's in general. So, All right. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from you again. And I think March is our next one. And so I'm hoping we'll have another great conversation. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys coming out, and you're doing great work. So,
well, thanks.
Yeah, you are welcome.
Great.